It began on a cool autumn evening when the first threads of mist slithered into our small town. Fog wasn't uncommon here, but this was different, denser, darker, and carrying with it a strange silence that muffled the world. By morning, the fog lingered like a shroud, so thick that even the sun seemed unable to pierce through it. At first, people treated it like any other weather anomaly, something to complain about on the way to work or while sipping coffee at the diner. But then the whispers started. It was subtle at first, barely audible over the hum of life. A strange murmur that seemed to rise and fall with the breeze, but there was no wind to carry it. Old Mrs. Carlson, who lived at the edge of town, swore she heard her late husband calling her name in the fog. Others claimed to hear children laughing, though no one could find any kids playing outside. By the third day, the whispers grew louder and more insistent. People began locking their doors and shutting their windows tight, but it didn't help. The fog crept through every crack and crevice, curling around door frames and seeping under windowsills. It wasn't long before the whispers found their way inside. The town grew quieter, as if everyone were holding their breath. The streets were deserted, the schools closed, and the church bells rang hollow in the emptiness. The whispers were inescapable now, constant hum just below the threshold of understanding. Some claimed they could make out words, pleas, warnings, even threats, but no two accounts ever matched. On the fourth night, the fog thickened to the point where visibility was nearly zero. That was when the disappearances began. It started with Joe Harper, the gas station attendant. He was last seen standing outside his station, staring into the fog as if entranced. When his wife went looking for him, she found only his shoes, neatly placed in the center of the parking lot. The next day, 3 more people vanished, then 7, then 12. Each time, their belongings were left behind, as if they'd simply stepped out of their lives and into the mist. Panic set in. The mayor called in state authorities, but the roads leading into town were swallowed by the fog, cutting us off from the outside world. Radios and cell phones stopped working, replaced by static and faint whispers. We were alone. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. They spoke in voices we recognized, loved ones, friends, even our own. "Come outside," they coaxed. "It's safe. We promise." Some people couldn't resist. They opened their doors and vanished into the mist, their cries fading into silence. By the 7th day, only a handful of us remained, barricaded in the old library at the center of town. We huddled together, surrounded by books and candles, as the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. That night, we made a pact. No one would leave, no matter what we heard. But the fog had other plans. Around midnight, the lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. We held hands and prayed, but it wasn't enough. One by one, the whispers called us by name. "Sarah," they said, in the voice of her little brother who drowned last summer. "Come to me." "Henry," they whispered, sounding just like his late wife. "I've missed you." I don't know how long I held out. Hours, minutes. Time seemed meaningless in the endless fog. But eventually, I heard it, a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Claire," it whispered, soft and sweet, like a lullaby. "It's me. It's Mom." I wanted to resist. I truly did. But the fog knows your deepest desires, your most painful regrets. It knows how to pull you in. And as I write this, my candle sputtering in the damp air, I can feel the fog pressing closer. The whispers are calling my name again. Louder this time, more urgent. I don't remember stepping outside, but the cold bite of the mist on my skin told me I had. The whispers surrounded me, wrapping around me like a cocoon, lulling me into a dreamlike state. I walked aimlessly, the world around me reduced to shifting shadows and faint echoes. The fog played tricks on my eyes. Shapes moved just beyond my vision, flickers of figures that dissolved the moment I turned my head. The ground felt uneven beneath my feet, as though the very earth had changed beneath the shroud. And the voices, they were everywhere, weaving a tapestry of sound that tugged at the edges of my sanity. "Claire," the voice of my mother beckoned. "You've been so strong. Come rest." "It's not real," I whispered to myself, clutching the small pocket knife I'd taken from the library's emergency kit. The cold steel was my only tether to reality. None of this is real. But the fog seemed to hear me. The whispers grew sharper, angrier. "You can't deny us," they hissed. "We're part of you." I stumbled, falling to my knees. The ground was soft, almost spongy, and when I looked down, I saw that it wasn't dirt or grass beneath me. It was something else, a pulsing, living mass that recoiled at my touch. I scrambled to my feet, panic surging through me. That was when I saw them. Figures emerged from the fog, their forms indistinct but undeniably human. They moved in jerky, unnatural motions, as if puppets on invisible strings. Their eyes glowed faintly, a sickly yellow light that pierced through the gloom. One of them reached out to me, its fingers elongated and claw-like. "Join us," it whispered, though its mouth didn't move. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing in my mind. "We've been waiting for you." I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the ground as the fog seemed to thicken around me. The whispers became a roar, a deafening cacophony that drowned out my own thoughts. I didn't know where I was going. The town had dissolved into an endless expanse of white and gray. Every landmark was gone, swallowed by the mist. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a clearing. The fog was thinner here, the ground firm and solid beneath my feet. In the center of the clearing stood a massive tree, its twisted branches reaching skyward like skeletal fingers. Hanging from its limbs were objects, photographs, trinkets, clothing, all suspended by thin strands of fog that seemed to hold them aloft. I approached cautiously, my eyes scanning the items. A photograph caught my attention, its edges worn and faded. It was of my mother, smiling brightly with her arms around me as a child. Tears filled my eyes as I reached out to touch it, but the moment my fingers brushed the surface, the whispers stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. The fog around me stilled, and the air grew heavy with an oppressive weight. I turned to run, but the figures from before were there, surrounding the clearing. They moved closer, their glowing eyes fixed on me. "It's time," one of them said, its voice resonating like a deep drumbeat in my chest. "You cannot escape." Desperation clawed at me as I fumbled with a pocket knife. "Stay back," I shouted, though my voice sounded weak and hollow in the vast emptiness. The figures didn't stop. They moved in unison, their limbs bending in impossible angles as they closed the distance. In a last-ditch effort, I slashed at the nearest figure. The blade passed through it as though it were smoke, and yet it recoiled, a high-pitched wail escaping its form. The others hesitated, their glowing eyes narrowing. Realizing this might be my only chance, I lunged toward the tree. If the items hanging from its branches were connected to the fog, perhaps destroying them would break its hold. I grabbed the photograph of my mother and tore it from the strand of mist holding it. The ground beneath me trembled, and the figures let out a collective scream. The fog began to swirl violently, the whispers returning in a chaotic storm of sound. I ripped down more items, a child's stuffed animal, a wedding ring, a pair of glasses, each one sending shockwaves through the clearing. The figures faltered, their forms flickering like dying flames. But the fog wasn't done with me. A tendril of mist shot out from the tree, wrapping around my wrist and pulling me toward the trunk. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, deep and ancient. "You cannot destroy us," it said. "We are eternal." Summoning every ounce of strength, I plunged the pocket knife into the tree's bark. The effect was immediate. The fog recoiled, its tendrils writhing as if in pain. The figures dissolved into nothingness, their screams fading into the distance. The ground beneath me buckled, and I was thrown backward as a blinding light erupted from the tree. When I opened my eyes, the fog was gone. The town lay in ruins, its buildings crumbled and overgrown with weeds. The streets were cracked and empty, as though years had passed in the span of days. I was alone. I wandered through the desolate town, calling out for anyone who might have survived. But there was no answer, only the faint echo of my own voice. The whispers were gone, but their absence felt like a gaping wound. Eventually, I made my way back to the library. The doors hung off their hinges, and the shelves were bare, the books reduced to ash. In the center of the room, I found a single object, the photograph of my mother, untouched and pristine. I picked it up, tears streaming down my face. The fog had taken everything, but it hadn't taken this. As I held the photo close, I heard a faint sound, not a whisper, but a breeze, gentle and soothing. For the first time in days, I felt hope. But deep down, I knew the fog wasn't truly gone. It was merely waiting, biding its time. And when it returned, I would be ready. Or so I told myself. Even as the days passed, the scars left by the fog lingered. The silence of the abandoned town gnawed at me, and every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I scavenged what I could, surviving on canned goods from the desolate grocery store and collecting rainwater in cracked barrels. I became a ghost in my own home, flinching at every creak and groan of the empty buildings. Sometimes at night, I would hear faint echoes, faint enough to make me question if they were real or just my mind playing tricks. They were not the oppressive whispers from before, but distant and haunting, like the remnants of a melody forgotten by time. I told myself it was nothing, that the fog was truly gone, but doubt gnawed at the edges of my sanity. Weeks turned into months, and I began to explore beyond the ruins of the town. The roads leading out were overgrown, and the forests that surrounded us seemed darker, more twisted. The world felt wrong, as if the fog had left its mark on everything it touched. The air was heavy, the sky perpetually gray, and the sun seemed unable to shine with its former brilliance. One day, while wandering the outskirts of town, I came across a strange sight. A circle of trees stood untouched by the decay that plagued the rest of the area. Their bark was smooth and pale, and their leaves shimmered with an unnatural silver hue. In the center of the circle was a pool of water, perfectly still and mirror-like. Drawn by an inexplicable pull, I approached the pool. As I peered into its depths, I saw not my reflection, but scenes from the past. The town as it once was, bustling with life and laughter. My mother baking cookies in our old kitchen. Joe Harper laughing with his wife at the gas station. It was beautiful and heartbreaking, a glimpse of everything we had lost. But then the images changed. The vibrant town dissolved into shadows, and the faces of my loved ones twisted into grotesque visages. The whispers returned, faint but unmistakable. "You thought you could escape," they said. "You are ours." I stumbled back, my heart racing. The pool began to ripple, and tendrils of mist rose from its surface. I turned and ran, the forest closing in around me. The whispers followed, growing louder with each step. I didn't stop until I was back in the ruins of the library, gasping for breath. That night, I dreamt of the tree in the clearing. Its branches reached out to me, beckoning. The whispers were there too, but softer, almost soothing. "Come back," they urged. "Finish what you started." When I awoke, the photograph of my mother was missing. In its place was a single leaf, silver and shimmering, like those from the trees by the pool. The fog may have retreated, but it was not defeated. It was waiting, watching, and it would return. I knew then that my battle with the fog was far from over. It had taken everything from me, but it had also awakened something within me, a resolve, a defiance. The fog was ancient and powerful, but so was the will to survive. As I prepared for the inevitable return of the whispers, I vowed to uncover the truth behind the fog. Why had it come? What did it want? And most importantly, how could it be stopped? The answers lay somewhere in the ruins of the town, in the forest, in the twisted remnants of the life I once knew. The fog may have been eternal, but so was hope. And as long as I drew breath, I would fight. Or so I told myself. Days turned into weeks, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the fog was still watching me. It was subtle, like a shadow at the edge of my vision or a fleeting chill on a warm day. The photograph of my mother remained missing, but I found more silver leaves scattered around the library, as if marking a trail only I could follow. The pool in the forest haunted my dreams. Each night, I saw its still surface ripple as faces emerged, faces of the lost, their eyes pleading for help. Among them, my mother's face lingered the longest. "Find us," she whispered, her voice carrying the same mixture of love and desperation that had lured me into the fog before. I had no choice but to return to the pool. The trek through the forest was harrowing. The twisted trees seemed to lean closer, their gnarled branches reaching out like claws. The ground was soft and spongy, pulsing faintly as if alive. I clutched the pocket knife tightly, though I knew it would offer little protection against whatever awaited me. When I reached the circle of silver trees, the air grew colder. The pool's surface was as still and reflective as I remembered, but now it was surrounded by faint, glowing symbols etched into the ground. They pulsed with a dim light, casting eerie shadows on the surrounding trees. I crouched to examine the symbols, tracing their strange patterns with my fingers. They felt warm to the touch, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Suddenly, the pool began to ripple, and the whispers returned, not as a cacophony, but as a single voice, deep and resonant. You seek answers, it said. But answers come at a price. The water shimmered, and an image appeared, the town as it was before the fog, vibrant and alive. Then the image shifted, showing the fog creeping in, engulfing everything in its path. Figures emerged, shadowy, indistinct, but undeniably human. They seemed to guide the fog, their glowing eyes watching as it consumed the town. Who are they? I asked aloud, my voice trembling. Why did this happen? The pool's surface rippled again, and the voice replied, they are the keepers, guardians of the boundary between worlds. Your town broke the balance, and the fog was their judgment. What balance? What did we do? My frustration boiled over, but the voice offered no clear answers. Instead, the water stilled, reflecting my own face back at me. Seek the tree, it said finally. The answers lie within its roots. The tree in the clearing loomed larger than I remembered, its gnarled branches reaching skyward like a monument to despair. The ground around it was cracked and scorched, as though the earth itself had rejected its presence. Yet the photograph of my mother hung from its lowest branch, pristine and untouched. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding. The whispers returned, louder with each step, urging me forward and warning me to turn back all at once. When I reached the tree, I hesitated. The bark felt cold and slick under my fingers, and the moment I touched it, the whispers coalesced into a deafening roar. The ground beneath me gave way, and I fell into darkness. I landed in a cavern, its walls pulsating with the same eerie light as the symbols by the pool. Roots from the tree above hung down like twisted veins, and at the center of the cavern was a massive stone altar. On it lay objects from the town, wedding rings, children's toys, even a pair of work boots I recognized as Joe Harper's. The voice from the pool echoed through the cavern. These are the tokens of those claimed by the fog. Their memories feed the boundary, maintaining the balance. I approached the altar, my eyes scanning the items. Each one seemed to pulse with a faint light, as though alive. Among them was the photograph of my mother. As I reached for it, the voice spoke again. Choose wisely. To take from the altar is to alter the balance. What you restore may come at a cost. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the photograph. The weight of the voice's warning pressed heavily on me, but I couldn't leave without her. I'll do whatever it takes, I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. The moment I touched the photograph, the cavern trembled. The roots above writhed violently, and the altar's light dimmed. The voice grew angrier, its tone reverberating through the cavern. You have disrupted the balance. The fog will not forgive. I clawed my way back to the surface, the photograph clutched tightly in my hand. The tree was withering before my eyes, its bark cracking and its branches collapsing inward. The fog returned, rolling in with a vengeance, thicker and darker than before. The whispers were no longer coaxing, they were enraged. You dare defy us, they roared. You will pay. I ran back to the library, the fog nipping at my heels. The ruins offered little protection, but it was all I had. I barricaded myself in what remained of the main hall, lighting the last of the candles. The photograph seemed to glow faintly, and as I stared at it, I felt a strange warmth emanating from it, a spark of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. The fog pressed against the windows, seeping through cracks in the walls. The whispers surrounded me, threatening to overwhelm my senses. But I refused to give in. I held the photograph aloft, shouting into the void. You took everything from me, but you won't take this. You won't take her. The photograph's glow intensified, and the fog recoiled, its tendrils writhing as if in pain. The whispers faltered, their voices disjointed and chaotic. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped outside, holding the photograph like a talisman. The fog swirled around me, a living storm of anger and despair. But the photograph's light grew brighter, piercing through the darkness. The whispers turned into screams, and the fog began to dissipate, unraveling like a frayed thread. As the last remnants of the fog vanished, the town was revealed, its ruins bathed in the soft light of dawn. The air was clear, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could breathe freely. But I knew this was only the beginning. The fog would return, and when it did, I would be ready. Armed with the knowledge of the tree and the altar, I would uncover the secrets of the keepers and find a way to end their hold on this world. For now, though, I stood in the ruins of my home, the photograph of my mother in my hands, and allowed myself a moment of peace.